Hello and welcome to another movie review stream. My name is Mark McPherson, film critic for movieswithmark.com, filminquiry.com, and TwinCitiesGeek.com. Well, we're in October, and it means we're getting closer to the award season. It also means we're getting the glut of, some of spooky movie season. So we'll cover a few of that. So what do we got covering today? Well, we're going to cover one of the horror films that we expect to get in October. We got The Exorcist Believer, a sequel slash reboot, kind of like similar to David Gordon Green's Halloween, especially since Gordon Green is directing it, so we'll cover that one. We'll also cover Dumb Money, the docudrama slash comedy about the GameStop short squeeze that happened in 2021. We'll also cover Gareth Edwards' new sci-fi film, The Creator, and there's a few other films that I want to cover as well that we'll get to, some smaller films, which I feel I might need to balance it out here, just not that the rest of the films are bad, but there's a lot more ground I want to cover, and I want to try to cover as much ground as I can. We're going to be covering a few films that are already in theaters right now, but I usually get early screeners, so I'm going to try to cover a lot more, especially since we're heading into award season. Like, I can already see the cloud up on the horizon. There's tons of big stuff I've got coming up on the horizon. Like, I'm already seeing screenings for like The Holdovers and Killers of the Flower Moon, the new Martin Scorsese film, Five Nights at Freddy's. There's Wish, I believe I already have ready to go. So there's a lot of movies coming up. So if you'd like to see early reviews like that, be sure to do all the call to action stuff. Like this video, follow this channel, follow me on all the social I'm on Twitter or X, whatever you want, but I'm also on Blue Sky. And by the way, if anyone does want to be on Blue Sky, just let me know and I'll see if I can get you a code as well, since it's a bit of a club. So, all right, let's get the credits out here so we can go right into the newest movie of this week, which debuted last weekend, The Exorcist Believer. So let me get my notes here and we'll get all set up. And we will talk about this latest horror film for the spooky movie season. All right. Sorry, I'm alternating between hot chocolate and water, so it's fall. What can I say? I got the sweater. All right. So let's get into it with The Exorcist in 3, 2, 1. So The Exorcist Believer is a revival, reboot slash soft sequel, I guess. It's it's similar to David Gordon Green's new Halloween trilogy, where it's trying to tell the new story, but it's also recognizing the first film as part of the continuity and going with it from there. Now, here's the thing: Universal and Blumhouse spent a lot of money to make a new series of Exorcist films. They spent a ridiculous amount of money on this stuff. So they're counting on, I think they're counting on The Exorcist being the same type of trilogy as Halloween, where the new Halloween trilogy made a lot of money. Unfortunately, it's off to a very, very, very rough start. The problem, I think, with The Exorcist Believer is that it never quite settles on the type of film that it wants to be. You get an idea of where it might be going, and then it divulges into so many paths and just splinters off with so many characters that it just becomes a convoluted mess by the end. Because it starts off well enough. It starts off with the story of Victor Fielding, played by Leslie Odom Jr., who tragically loses his wife, and he's only able to save his child after his wife dies during childbirth amid a earthquake in Haiti. Years later, his daughter grows up, his daughter named Angela, played by Lydia Jewett, and they have a good relationship. They set it up where it's we get to know and like them a little bit. Similar in essence to the first Exorcist film, we were given enough time to get to know and like this family, where we want to care for them once the big demon possession comes about, because we all see where this is going. Eventually she's going to get possessed by a demon, and this family is going to have its values challenged. Now there's a lot that you can play with just on that. You have this idea of Victor being this single father. He's lost his faith. He doesn't really find much to be hopeful for except his daughter, and he's got to try to learn to bring others into his heart. You could build on that. And the film presents those themes and those aspects where it could build up something through there. The problem is it just throws a whole lot of other stuff at the screen. Like it throws like early on in the film there's a baptism that just happens to Angela's mother, and that's apparently going to protect her through all this. There's another girl thrown into the mix here. So like Angela, the whole idea behind like the demon possession is that Angela goes into the woods with her friend, and they both end up getting possessed by demons. So in addition to, Angela experiencing all the typical exorcism stuff where, she acts all creepy around the house, she does bizarre stuff like with, pissing the bed and stuff like that, and there's blood in the tub and just randomly appearing throughout the house, just doing all the standard spooky exorcism girl stuff. But then you have another girl thrown into the mix who, she comes from a much more religious family that for some reason, which is never quite explained, it's just kind of like tossed out there, is that she was never baptized even though she's from a highly religious family. So like there is something to draw from there, like like this questioning about if your beliefs are true or if they're just like kind of like a virtue signaling element. There's a clash that you could build on through there, but the film doesn't have time for that either, because it also wants to introduce aspects from the first exorcism film by bringing Ellen Burstyn back to talk about like Reagan. So basically like she comes back more or less to kind of play the same role as Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, where she comes back and she's mostly like, yeah, I've been there. Yep, I've seen this all. So it's mostly just, she observes and she does all that. Yeah, I'm familiar with all this, and I can guide you a little bit, but and the thing is that could be cool too, but unfortunately her role is mostly just there to dole out these simplistic monologues on the aspects of confronting evil. Which is pretty sad, because like it just comes off like just like as a shameless cameo, to the point where you could throw anyone into the mix. You could invent an entirely different character to do the exact same thing, and I think it would actually hold a lot more weight, because the way that it comes off here, it's just like, okay, she recognizes Reagan, and if you're like, I guess this is minor spoiler here, but if you are looking forward to Reagan, she does come back. You won't get to see Linda Blair, but in a very kind of like last minute, like pretty much an afterthought of like a nostalgic inclusion. It comes off, yeah. And so many other aspects of this film just do not work. In particular, once you get to the third act of this film, where the two girls are finally, they've gone too far, they've hurt people, they've observed them, they can't find anything wrong with them, and they need that spiritual intervention of an exorcism. There's too much going on. And what I mean by that is they bring in so many spiritual leaders to combat this. Like, you have a former nun, who's a current nurse, played by Ann Dowd, who you might recognize her from The Handmaid's Tale, in which she also plays like a conflicted religious person who's just like, like she's like, oh, my beliefs. She's like, it's kind of sad. It feels like she's typecasted as like the same character that she was in The Handmaid's Tale. But in addition to that, you also have like a ritualistic healer. You have a Baptist who comes in here. You have a pastor. You have a priest. Like they have all these spiritual forces that combine together. Like it's almost kind of like a joke, the way it's like, like a ritualistic healer, a Baptist, and a pastor and a father all converge on an exorcism with these two girls, and goes from there. And as especially I want to harp on just like the third act here, when they're trying to take the demon out of these girls. It fluctuates between so many different things. Like at first it feels like it's a matter of like unity, then it's a matter of like like spiritual connection with others, even if you don't share their beliefs. Then it comes down to an acceptance of the way that life proceeds, and just being content with that. Then it becomes just more about just straight up just like the key to it all is just a baptism. And it's like it's so all over the place, and none of it like if I feel like if this film maybe had an extra hour, it might have been able to better explore these aspects and make them interconnect better, because you can see all the puzzle pieces here of a good exorcism film, but like it feels like they're from different puzzles and all just like smashed together to try to just like it feels like they're just throwing everything at the screen and seeing what sticks. And unfortunately, most of it doesn't, because it darts all around this, but all around this film between, like, recognizing the first exorcism film, contemplating the nature of demons, like looking at the nature of the paranormal, questioning spirituality, questioning unity, questioning family, questioning neighbors, like the conflict between being religious and not being religious, being baptized and not being baptized. And it's too much, to the point where even like the demon getting into Angela is just inexplicable. But I think the one thing that frustrates me the most about Believer is the fact that we don't get to see a lot of Angela in the possessed demon state doing all like the bizarre and like crazy demon possession stuff that Reagan did in The Exorcist. And I think, like, this is just my theory, but I feel like the reason that they don't have as much of it in the film is because of the simple fact that kids being possessed by demons is funny. It just is. And if you want proof of this, you can go back to a film earlier this year called the Pope's Exorcist, which is just it's so uproarious. Like it's campy, it's ridiculous, and it's very much tongue in cheek. Like it feels like it's walking that line, like it's trying to be serious, but it's just so absurd, with just like this kid being possessed by a demon, saying all these foul things, doing all this ridiculous violence, and just cussing up a storm. That's just it's so funny. And even if you go back and watch the first Exorcist film, like a lot of older people tell you how much how scary the first Exorcist film is, and it's mostly the people who first saw it when it came out. And back then, yeah, sure, it was I imagine it was pretty scary back then. But you go back and watch it now, and you can't help but laugh. Like here's and I think it's just because like you're thinking, okay, if I was a kid and I was in this situation, like if I got this role, I would be hamming it up. I would have so much fun being possessed by a demon, saying all the things I couldn't, doing all the things I couldn't. It would just be hilarious. And I think like the problem with Exorcist Believer is I think it wants to take the demon possession seriously, so it tries to downplay as much of that as possible. So we don't get as much of Angela and her friend, doing all the crazy exorcism stuff. Which is sad, because like the few times that it does happen, like you can tell they're trying to be, a little bit more earnest and stern with it rather than just going for the laughs. But really, it's kind of impossible, because you can't help but laugh at some of the scenes where just like the lights go out and just bam, Angela's there. You can't help but laugh at, that she pisses the bed. She starts up, like the bathtub with water, and for some reason there's blood in it now, and just Angela's friend walking through the church covered in blood and just like saying grotesque stuff and stabbing out eyeballs. It's silly. But the problem is, I don't think it's silly enough. I think like this is a film that it doesn't want to embrace the campy nature of demon possessed kids, because like it's unavoidable. You can try to make it serious, you can try to make it stern, but the fact of the matter is, like, in this day and age, like a film about someone being possessed by a demon is usually either going to be ridiculous or kind of like standard supernatural boring stuff. Like there's a few films that have kind of broken through the mold, but they're usually aiming for something a bit higher. And I think with just all the messy themes that are never built up or paid off in Exorcist Believer, it just comes off as just a lackluster, lukewarm, and just like, like constantly contradicting it. It's constantly contradicting itself to the point where I don't even know what the film is trying to say by the end. Even when it gets to Ann Dowd making this, making this statement that she gives to police on like the nature of evil and learning to live with the world that we're given, it just comes off as just kind of like just like a bland platitude to go out on, where it feels like most of this film was just about showcasing a few familiar Exorcist stuff, like, in terms of like other characters and familiar kills, including like, I will give the film this. There was a good quality kill where they do like, like the head twisting that's usually associated with The Exorcist, and somebody gets their head twist who shouldn't be twisting their neck that way. That was an okay kill. But when all you can really give me is like an okay kill, and you're downplaying much of the silly elements, which are usually more fun, I think. I think if they embraced more of that, it'd be much more fun film. Because in trying to come off as like an earnest contemplation on faith and spirituality, I don't think you can do much with that, especially since a lot of like paranormal horror of this nature, it usually kind of follows a pretty rigid track. And you can kind of like see this film trying to like veer off to different sides and explore more, but it never goes that extra mile. It never goes that extra length to make all these different themes and all the characters thrown into the mix pay off. And it just sadly doesn't work. And the fact that this is going to be part of a new trilogy, it's not a good start for this new Exorcism film trilogy. I honestly don't know who knows? Like, this was pretty bad, but maybe the next two films will learn their lesson and actually improve. But right now, it's just like The Exorcist Believer is all over the place, and it's an incoherent mess that can never decide quite what it wants to be, outside of just being a film where some girls get possessed by some demons, and they do wicked stuff for a little bit, and then acknowledge all the other Exorcist films. So yeah, it's sad that this is the start of a new Exorcist series. So The Exorcist Believer is currently playing in theaters everywhere, and it will be... It should be on... It'll probably be on Peacock soon, at the rate it's going. And I say that only because it was financed through like a deal with Peacock. And if I read the news correctly, I believe like the other two films are going to go like straight to Peacock, which might be for the best. And I say that only because Universal paid $400 million for the rights to make 3 Exorcist films. And to the film's credit, it only cost $30 million. Worldwide, it's already made that money back. But if you spend that much, you're kind of hoping for something more like, David Gordon Green's Halloween, especially since, they hired the same director. And especially since I believe the first Halloween film made about like $250 million, which for a slasher film is just, that's the equivalent to like making like $1 billion for a slasher film. So I'm guessing that Universal was hoping they could, capture lightning in a bottle again, but they're counting their chickens before they hatch, especially since when you consider that the other Halloween films, like the first one, they didn't even have a trilogy planned out. It was just they started with David Gordon Green stuff, and then it turned out to be a hit, and then they went forward. I really think they should have just done the first one and see what happens, because not a good start. Not to mention, how long can you do a... like, they're going to have to go like a completely different route with the next film. They gotta. Okay, so let's talk about another film, which is trying to be more funny. And it's called Dumb Money. And I did not intend to rhyme that. That just fell out of my mouth that way. All right. So let's talk about Dumb Money. Here we go in 3. Actually, I gotta get some water here, because I can feel my throat going. All right. And in 3, 2, 1. So Dumb Money is the biopic about the 2021 GameStop short squeeze. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this event in which the GameStop stock shot up incredibly in early 2021, and it was just like this whole movement of people who were trying to buy up as much stock as they could and try to essentially kind of like make hedge fund managers pay, and more or less try to like either get rich or teach people a lesson. Although it's a little bit debatable because here's the thing, like in the time since this short squeeze, this event, there's been at least 2 documentaries on this, and the documentaries are pretty much on the same level. They're all looking at this from the perspective of the people involved who made the short squeeze happen, and who were buying up stock and trying to make this work, and basically trying to, it was basically framed as kind of like a fight between those who barely had any money during the pandemic and hedge fund managers who were making tons of money. So this was more or less, at least from the perspective of those involved, a way to make them pay. And there's a lot of ways you could go with adapting the story. And I think, like, I feel like some people are going to look at this with, like, the big cast that they have and think that this is going to be akin to something like The Big Short, in which they take a financial story about stocks and then try to make sense of it all. And the film is not quite that, like, analytical as The Big Short, because, like, The Big Short actually slowed down and stopped to explain to you the ins and outs of how all of this works. And Dumb Money does not do that. It's trying to be like a more involving story from, like, the perspective of those who were buying up the stock and their reasons for doing it, which honestly, if you actually do look at, like, all the data and everything like that, it was more of an emotional drive than it was one that made analytical sense. So it was more or less like a revolution fueled not so much by wanting to make money as much as it was trying to feel like you were doing something about getting back at hedge fund managers. So at the center of the story is Keith Gill, played by Paul Dano, who is, like the first person who was like, I'm holding out for the GameStop stock. I've done all my homework. I live stream about it. I post all my data up for everyone to see, and I'm telling everyone that, I can make this work. I'm going to keep buying up stock in GameStop, and I'm going to make it work. And of course, everyone thinks this is ridiculous. They're like, GameStop, the video game retailer during the pandemic when everyone buys stuff online, like no one can see it. But, Keith's wife sticks with him through it, even though that they have a kid as well. And soon enough, the more that he keeps at it, other people start joining in. They buy up stocks. They decide, life sucks right now. I barely got any money. What would it hurt? Just throw a few bucks at it, just see what happens. And as more people kept throwing money at it and buying stock, GameStop's stock shot up. And this made some of the hedge fund managers a little bit antsy, I guess. Like the film does a good job at kind of portraying like how Gabe Plotkin, played by Seth Rogen, was the most concerned about the money that they were going to lose from GameStop being shot up as much as it was, because the hedge fund managers, if that stock was going down, they felt like they were getting some money from it, but when it shoots up, they're essentially losing money. Like there's more to it. There's a lot of mechanics involved, but that's the basics of it. That's kind of like whittled down to make this story work. The other hedge fund managers, who are played by Nick Offerman playing Kenneth Griffin, and Vincent D'Onofrio playing Steve Cohen, they're not sweating too much. They realize, like, oh, okay, there's a little bit of a shakeup here, but we're pretty sure that we can get around this. And at least from the perspective of the film, it portrays him as basically kind of like tinkering with the workings of the stock buying app Robinhood to try to make sure that GameStop would not keep going up in stock. And there's a lot more to the story than that, as I learned further. And even when I was watching like the documentaries on this, I felt like there was a heavy bias on this, and there was like a bigger story not being told here, because a lot of people who were involved with this were looking at it from the perspective of like the online meme culture. They saw it as like a revolution, which is like, it made sense to them. It was a simple thing: buy stock in GameStop and you don't sell it. You stick with it. They had this whole motto of like, diamond hands and hold the stock, don't sell it, just keep buying it to make it go up and up and up and up. and we'll make these hedge fund managers pay. Um, and it feels like that was kind of all they were trying to do, even though a lot of them were kind of like maybe hoping that they'd make a lot of money with this, which they technically were, but it's a matter of like, well, how long are you going to hold out for? How long is this going to keep going for? And when you actually think about what the ultimate end goal was of the short squeeze in all this, it doesn't really make all that much sense. And I think like that's one of the good reasons why this film doesn't try to be like The Big Short, where it's trying to divulge that, because if you actually do look further into this, like there's a great video by Dan Olson on this called like This Is Financial Advice, which does a great job cutting through a lot of more than just like the memes, because like the biggest criticism of this film is that it gets lost in the muck of the online culture, which is, it's a benefit to understanding why people did this, but it also doesn't fully explain, like the mechanics of how this would work and how a lot of people were kind of walking into a financial trap here. Because ultimately, in the end, a few people who did sell ended up making money, and a lot who didn't just kind of ended up right back in the hole again. And even after like the investigation into like the hedge fund managers and Robinhood, and when all that concluded, ultimately barely anyone on the 1% paid that much. It was kind of like there was a little bit of an effect on how like Wall Street observes stocks and how they're regulated, but just like a small amount. Like it's a tiny, really in the grand scheme of things, it's a bit of like a tiny dent when all things are considered with this. But like, you try to make it like relatable, and I guess like from the perspective of those who are buying up stock, I think it works. I think there's a much bigger story to be told here, but you're trying to make this film in under 2 hours. You're trying to make it entertaining, and the best way to do that is to make it a simple underdog story of championing for the little dogs. And you have some pretty good performances here. Like you have American Ferrera playing this, this nurse who is a single mother who's at her wit's end, just trying to find a way to make some money. You have Anthony Ramos playing a GameStop clerk who's just had enough of GameStop and wants to feel like he has some ownership in it. You have two college students who are both in debt, so of course they have stakes that they want to, like they have a stake in the stock as well. So you get to see a few different stories in all this. But it's very telling that the biggest criticism of this movement is Keith's brother, played by Pete Davidson, who essentially just calls everyone doing this nerds. Like basically like, oh, I don't understand it. Whatever. They're doing nerd stuff. They're posting memes. The most mild of criticism for this movement. And make no mistake, there's a lot of criticism for this. Even if you're not all that familiar with the short squeeze, you can see like there is stuff that worth criticizing. Like in particular, they use a lot of ableist slurs in this movement to try to identify themselves. They're trying to be edgy. They're trying to use like slurs and stuff like that, and it's something that's barely questioned. In fact, even when the film brings it up, it tries to skate around them. Like at one point, Gabe is looking at like a headline in which they are using ableist slurs, and he's almost kind of like questioning it like off to the side, like, wait, are they sure they want to use that language? Are they sure this is good for them? At another point, the Reddit profile of not Reddit, the subreddit of Wall Street Bets is criticized for people acting creepy in there and making weird threats, and it's just kind of brush off. It's like, oh, the moderators handled it, not a big deal. And then later on, the subreddit is taken down, and they say like, well, okay, they use a little bit of edgy language here and there, but that's not a big reason to take it down. And it's kind of like, there's so many aspects of this that you feel a lot of people are uncritical of, where it could be dismantled easily, and it's not questioned all that much within there. I mean, if you're looking at this film critically, you can kind of see like, yeah, okay, you should have addressed this. Maybe don't have that there. There's a lot of stuff here that does not age well. In particular, like they try to champion Elon Musk for interviewing one of the people from Robinhood. Thankfully, there's a much better interview of someone who grills the Robinhood CEOs on this, which is weird because you have both those interviews and it feels like one has a lot more emotional depth than Elon Musk's response in all this. Not to mention the fact that there's memes championing Elon in this, which is, it has not aged well. So yeah, like I'm a little bit conflicted about this film because, like, on the one hand, yes, it is uncritical of the Wall Street Bets movement and everything that Keith assembled and the people behind it. But on another level, it's tightly edited. It's got some fine performances, and in terms of being staged as an underdog story, I feel like it works. And I also feel like it avoids a lot of landmines that you could step on when you make this type of story. So they stage it in a way that you want to cheer on, like Keith and all these people, to stick it to the hedge fund managers, even though in the grand scheme of things they weren't doing a whole lot when you actually like dig down deep into it, besides just buying up stocks and just like going online and like posting on YouTube like, oh, let's go and here's memes and all this. It's just like there's a much deeper story to be told here, and I feel like further down the line we will probably get that story. I will say though that in terms of like trying to cover all this and trying to make sense of it all, from a very like GameStop short squeeze, for dummies type of angle, it mostly works. The performances work. It frames itself decently as an underdog story, and on that level, I like the film. But on another level, yeah, it's got some concerning elements. So it's a very well made film, even though it's very uncritical of a lot of elements which are worth criticizing. But hey, at least an audience will be able to better understand the short squeeze a bit more, instead of just writing it off. It's just like, oh, the stock went up for a while and people did some bizarre stuff. Because I feel like there's a personal angle that, for those who didn't take notice of this or weren't quite, or like generations from now who aren't quite familiar with it, might not understand the mindset of those who went along with this movement. Because in particular, I remember seeing one post on social media from someone saying, like I've got nothing. My job is paying nothing. I don't have any money for retirement. I can't afford a house. I can barely afford my car. I can't afford anything. So I'm just going to hang on to this GameStop stock and just try to make these hedge fund managers pay. Like, I don't care about getting rich or anything. I just want to make someone pay for the way that the world is. Which is, it's a bit depressing, and I wish like the film laid in more to that darkness. It does a little bit towards the end of the film, but I wish that it highlighted that a lot more, because there was a desperation and there was a need to make it feel like you wanted to stick it to Wall Street in some way. And that's the biggest thing that drove the GameStop short squeeze. So for highlighting that aspect, I really do like the film. Although a much bigger conversation needs to be had about it, which hopefully we will get more of in the future. So Dumb Money, I believe, is still in theaters. It's been out for about 2 weeks. So you can check it out. It's got some good performances, and it's tightly edited. Also, I like that the rap soundtrack they got going on. It has some decent style. It's one of those films where you appreciate it more for the filmmaking aspect than you do like the aspects of trying to be truthful and analytical on it. So basically what I'm saying is don't go in expecting The Big Short, because it's not. Not by any stretch of the imagination. All right, let me get my notes up here for our next film, the sci-fi film The Creator from Gareth Edwards. Let me get my notes up here. All right, and here we go in 3, 2, 1. So Gareth Edwards, The Creator, is an original sci-fi film about some very familiar concepts. So this story is all about a future in which artificial intelligence has become a little bit more sentient, and after being embraced a little too much, humanity decides to kind of cut itself off from AI. So this is more or less kind of like at the point, you arrive at this story in the point where, AI has gone a bit too far, they've become more sentient, and they've started defending themselves. And so once there's like one nuke that goes off in LA, like that's it. Like America cuts itself off from AI. It wants nothing to do with it. It needs to shut it down. Meanwhile, over on the Asian continent, which is just kind of like amalgamated into New Asia. It's kind of like how like Ghost in the Shell just kind of like merged a whole bunch of Asian cultures together. Even though the film is mostly shot in Thailand. Although it does have Japanese characters in it. But yes. So AI has basically gone to seek sanctuary in New Asia, and America is trying to fight back against AI. So they built a giant weapon, and they're trying to track down the original creator of AI, referred to as Namada. And so, to find Namada, they have brought in Joshua, a military sergeant played by John David Washington, to find Namada. And while he does so, he grows to, grow fond of the people in New Asia. He forms a romance there, and he's going to have a kid on the way. So he takes more of a liking to the people who have embraced AI. But for being undercover so long, it isn't long before, the military stops by and he can't stop them, and he loses his wife in all of it. Now, that would be an okay film, an okay sci-fi film, with like, kind of like that Dances with Wolf aspects in which Joshua, ends up going native, and he ends up, kind of learning to respect AI more. But what's fascinating about this film is that we arrive where that type of film would end and see what happens next after that. Because following those events, Joshua is approached by the military and says, hey, we got a bigger lead on Namada, and we think that your wife might still be alive. So come with us, and we'll try to find your wife while trying to find the creator of artificial intelligence, Namada, and bring him in. And so Joshua agrees, but when he actually goes to seek out Namada, what he does find is basically the first AI child, referred to as Alfie, played by Madeline Yuna Voiles. And he basically learns to kind of like get to know and kind of like this kid the more that this artificial intelligence learn to recognize language and interact better and try to better understand the world. In addition to that, Alfie is also an artificial intelligence that has grown more powerful. She can essentially control more devices remotely. Like, she could stop vehicles, she could stop robots. She might even be able to stop that giant satellite in the sky that America's built, which has basically just been obliterating New Asia. Like, that's been like their whole motive this whole time, is just, investigate parts of New Asia. Is the AI here? Well, maybe it might be, but once we've confirmed that we can't find Namada, we'll just blow it up anyway. And it just keeps happening and happening. So yeah, New Asia has a lot invested in trying to bring this satellite down, and Alfie might just be the key to it. So most of the film is mostly just Alfie and Joshua going on this journey in which Joshua learns to, experience what it's like to be a father, and Alfie learns what it is to be human. And they have meaningful conversations about, what it is to be a human being and contemplate what it's like to go into the afterlife. And basically Joshua believing that they both won't go to heaven, both because Joshua views himself as a bad person and Alfie doesn't see herself as a person at all. Now, when you look at this and you look at like the setting too, where, it goes from like, it ventures into like, like Thai villages, but then it also goes into, the typical big skyscrapers and, like the neon designs of something that you see in like a cyberpunk future. There's a lot of familiar sci-fi elements here. And I'm sure that like a lot of people are probably not going to like the film on that basis, because the overall themes here are not that original. It's fairly, familiar sci-fi ground here. What it is to be human, the dangers of artificial intelligence, the recognizing the value of technology, the conflict between humanity wanting to embrace technology and wanting to shun it. A lot of these aspects are questioned, and they probe down familiar territory. But I think this is a film where it's so well made that I didn't really mind so much of this familiar sci-fi ground being treaded on. Mostly just because, like, the film looks amazing. Like, they shot it on location in Thailand. They didn't use green screen for filming any of these locations, and it shows in terms of like the lush environment they have here. The visual effects are mostly just kind of like painted on top of everything that's going on here, which is great because it doesn't really feel as kind of like hokey. It feels more believable, even for like an Asian continent where you have like a variety of characters who have signifiers that they're AI, where basically they essentially have holes in their head. They have like like the robotic parts on the side here, and they got the little hole right there that you can look straight through. So and then like there's other stuff, like there's robots running around, there's giant tanks, there's the big satellite in the sky, and there's a big showdown in space. So there is like I'm not trying to like downplay it. It's like they only use a little bit of special effects here. They do use a lot, but they use them well and efficiently, especially when you consider the fact that this film was made for under $80 million. And as far as I'm concerned, in terms of like big budget blockbusters, it looks fantastic, like compared to a lot of blockbusters that cost well over somewhere between like 150 to 200 million dollars. This one looks astounding. Like it's on the same level as like District 9, where they were spending a modicum amount of the same money and achieving far better visual effects, mostly just by being smart about it. And I think a lot of credit goes to director Gareth Edwards, who's used to working with special effects, but also used to working on a budget. Like most people will know Edwards for working on big budget franchise stuff like 2014's Godzilla and 2016's Rogue One, a Star Wars story, which were all big budget films. They did make bank. But he also made a little film before that called Monsters, which was made for under $1 million. And it was really effective in, how it decided to use its visual effects and stage like a kind of sci-fi horror film. And this is the same deal. Like the creator, it's a big, large film. It's pretty much an epic. Like I watched this on IMAX, and it was fantastic to see it on IMAX with like the grand landscapes and looking at all the beautiful vistas, combined with like the well composited robot effects and just like straight up robots and tanks and satellites and all that thrown into the mix. It all looks great. It all sounds great. And it's mostly due to the credit of Edwards kind of like crunching the numbers and realizing, if we kept our crew low and we filmed like correctly, where the visual effects artists could just take the beautiful footage we shot and paint over it, we could save some money if we just went to Thailand and shot on location. And that's exactly what they did, and actually turned out to be a pretty beautiful film. You got some pretty great performances here, like Allison Janney as this kind of like hardened colonel who is basically kind of playing like the evil colonel role from Avatar. So you're just waiting for her to get her comeuppance, and it pays off beautifully the way you'd expect. You have a hardened warrior played by Ken Watanabe, who I don't quite want to reduce it to this level, but kind of like similar to like like The Last Samurai, where it's just like oh, you want to come to my land, you want to learn the ways of our people. He kind of does the same thing, but with like AI. And he fits fine into his role, and he also gives it a bit of credibility. Having Ken Watanabe back, from the time that he was on Godzilla, it was nice to see him on screen. So he does well here, and the way that the plot unfolds, it kind of goes the route you kind of expect. Like by the time you get to the start of the third act, you can see all the wheels turning about where this is going and more or less how it's going to end. And I guess I was a little bit dismayed that I didn't see that the film kind of ends so abruptly. Like, it feels like it ends right at the point where there's like that thematic cohesion about how, because the film is ultimately about how, like, like love can survive during a time where humanity is, kind of like cut off between, what it is to, like trying to like grapple with itself and its own technology. And the fact that it comes together by showcasing how love can survive a little bit and family is the important thing that matters here, which sounds corny, but the film makes it work. It makes you believe in that, mostly just because we get to spend enough time with the characters, and just enough, I think, that you get to know and like them, where you care about their plight, and that if there's the possibility that they won't make it out alive, that it's actually going to feel a little bit like a gut punch by the end. So yeah, it's a very familiar track, but it's so well made. Like, it's an old car, but it's been giving a fresh coat of paint, and it's amazing to look at. It's visually dazzling, and in terms of hitting all these familiar beats, it does them rather well. And it also has I guess I should stress this too. It also has a little bit of a humorous edge to it. And I say that as like, it finds the moments where you can find comedy in this dark scenario where tons of people are dying and the world is at war with AI. And it's like, you need those humanizing moments to just, you need a little break from all like the darkness so that you can, recognize the humanity in all this. Because like humor is humanizing, and it's a good break from like all the action and the darkness and the violence and the death and destruction, which there is a lot of in this film. So yeah, it's a very well-crafted sci-fi film, and more importantly, an original sci-fi film that was made on a budget well under $100 million, and it looks and it sounds fantastic. And I hope we get more like this. I hope that Gareth Edwards keeps plugging away and giving us more of these sci-fi films that are, even if they are going on familiar ground, they look and sound amazing and manage to make their familiar thematic elements pay off well. So hopefully we get more like this, because I would love to see more original sci-fi film, especially more sci-fi films like this that feel original but also big and grand and can still be as epic as any $200 million blockbuster. So yeah, I really enjoyed The Creator. So The Creator is hopefully still in theaters. If you can, go check it out. Because it's a sci-fi film that could use some love. And like I said, $80 million, so it'll ultimately probably in the end make its money back and make a little bit of a profit. But we need more films like this. Because if you prove that you can shoot sci-fi films for that amount of money, that are original, that are not based on anything, then we might get some more original sci-fi films. I'm just saying. If you want more sci-fi films or more original films that are not just like based on like comic books and video games and source material like that, you got to champion stuff like The Creator, So hopefully we'll get some more of that. Okay, let me get my notes here, because I got two more films that I wanted to cover here. And these are smaller original films that I want to cover. So let me get my notes up here for 1001. I'm willing to admit, I'm doing a bit of catch up here. These are films from much earlier in the year that I'm just now getting caught up on, grammar. So yeah, I felt like I need to cover this stuff too, because I want to highlight some films that could use some love. So this is my like trying to give back some love to some films that could use it moment, because I doubt that many people have heard of 1001. Okay, so here we go in 3, 2, 1. So 1001 is a story about a kid who grows up with a mother who's basically kind of basically not quite kidnapped, but kind of taken him away from child services so that she feels that this kid can be with his mom and grow up, with a fairly normal life instead of like, being tossed around to, other parents. So the mother is Inez, played by Tenya Taylor, and her boy is Terry. And Inez is a hairdresser who's having some problems, kind of like staying out of trouble, like, not ended up, trying to keep out of jail, trying to make her life work, and just struggling to keep it together. And she's finding it very hard to do so with her son, Terry, who we meet up in the film when he's 6 years old during the 1990s. And Inez makes some tough and illegal calls to try to, like, make sure that Terry grows up with his mother and, has a better life for him. So she tries to make it work. She keeps him inside. She tries to give him a new identity, and just tries to make this life work, even though, like, social services want to try to take this away from her. And to her credit, the way that Inez goes through this, she does seem to make this work. Terry grows up to, learn to, understand more of the streets that he lives on in New York, and tries to, find a future for himself. And that by the time that we catch up with him in the 2000s, there's, you feel like he's actually going to, make something of himself. Like he's actually going to go off to college and have a better life. But at the same time, Inez, throughout all this, is struggling to keep it together. She's basically debating whether or not she should let Terry's father back into his life again, because Terry's dad, who's called Lucky, played by Will Catlett, it's someone who Inez is reluctant about bringing back into Terry's life, and thankfully Lucky actually turns out to be a good benefit for Terry. But at the same time, Lucky also realizes that Inez is kind of breaking some rules here. In fact, there's more that she's not telling Terry about all this that could actually damage his future further. So there's this constant battle about Inez trying to create a stable family life and, adhering to the letter of the law to ensure that Terry might actually have a future. So it's a conflict between Terry's life and her life as a mother, which is all the more compounded by the fact that, there's violence out in the street in New York. There's problems, with police brutality that she's always worrying about. There's gentrification taking place where it feels like she's going to get kicked out of her apartment despite the landlord seeming like he's going to be there to help, even though he's really not ultimately. And it's just, there's all these compounding factors that when the film does get to the third act, there's a big surprise that just kind of leads to this very tearful end where it feels like, like in the end, as much as you try to do for your kids, there's ultimately going to have to be a sacrifice. And maybe not one you're expecting, or maybe it's one that is coming and that is going to be hard to deny, but it's like it's going to happen. And like, and even if you don't know the big twist at the end here, the fact that Inez is kind of like breaking some laws by keeping Terry off the books and changing his name and trying to make this family life work, you can sense that like another shoe is going to drop here. And you're just kind of like watching with anticipation, because throughout all of it, there are warm moments with Terry and Lucky and Terry and Inez. Like they have their ups and downs like any typical family. And just when you get to that ultimate reveal, it's a major gut punch. Like just the way that it's revealed, the way that Terry tries to process everything about feeling like his life is being denied, and at the same time that like his mother is being denied a life as well. It creates so many conflicting emotions, and it just ends on this note where it's not so much about, it's not so much about who was right. It was about, what was built up over that time and if it will be meaningful in the future. So yeah, it's a very somber drama, but it's also, it packs such an emotional gut punch by the end. And a lot of credit needs to be given to Avery Rockwell, both the writer and director of this film, with a directorial debut, I believe. It's just yeah, it's a fascinating film, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about this. It's one of those films where and it's like the other thing too is like it's tightly edited. Like it proceeds from like the 1990s to the 2000s, and it transitions beautifully from one section to another by briefly highlighting like echoes of headlines of the era, and showing the passage of time, how the apartment has decayed, and how Terry grows up, and his how he interacts with the world. And it just, you feel like you've seen this coming of age story happen here, where it's both like a mother and a son, where you feel for them both, and ultimately when you get to that very like emotionally heart-wrenching ending where you realize they are going to ultimately end up parting ways in this, it knocks it knocks you out, man. And yeah, it's just beautiful filmmaking from Rockwell here, and I can't wait to see what this director does next, because this is beautiful filmmaking, and filmmaking that feels very like personal. Like it feels like a story like this, it'd be so easy to get lost in the weeds of the era, where just like oh, it would harp on 9/11, or it would harp on this case, or this aspect of police brutality, and thankfully it just becomes kind of like more like the background for this story of a family that is struggling to define itself. So yeah, 1001 is a mesmerizing drama. So yeah, that's one of my favorites of the year. So 1001 is currently playing on Prime Video. If you have not seen it, go check it out immediately. You will not be let down. And finally, I have one last film. This is going to be a bit of a brief review, but one that I felt I should touch just so I could cover more ground here. So let me get my notes up here, and here we go in 3, 2, 1. So Inside is a story all about Willem Dafoe playing an art thief who ends up being stuck in someone's condominium, penthouse, whatever you want to call it. Basically someone's weird living place / art gallery. So he goes in there trying to steal some valuable art, and due to a malfunction with the security system, he ends up trapped inside the building. Not just trapped inside the penthouse, but he's like, he's trapped to like the whims of this malfunctioning technology. So it could be too cold, it could be too hot. There's only so much food in there. There's only so much, entertainment that he can find, especially when the technology is not working that well, and that there's security cameras to watch, and like, music like will automatically play. So you can tell that this is going to get like very draining and very annoying fast for Willem Dafoe playing this art thief. So on that premise alone, I'm sure like a lot of people probably want to see that film, because there's just like if you love Willem Dafoe, you've probably said something like, oh, I could just watch him be trapped in a room and just make that work for hours on end. And for the 90 minutes that this film plays, it kind of works, but it also feels a little bit all over the place. Because like initially, like the bookending monologue that Dafoe has here is all about how he feels that art will last longer than anything else. Like it feels like people won't last, or material goods won't last, but like art is something that will live on forever. And it's an interesting angle, I think, worth highlighting, but for most of the film, and I feel like it's because the film doesn't want to just be that simplistic, but it tries to explore other aspects of like what it is to be human, questioning your own existence, going down to like the depths of loneliness and trying to find some meaning in your life when you're trapped, trying to make sense of a world that doesn't make sense, and feeling like you have a weird paranormal relationship with someone that that will never respond and you'll never meet. Not just for like the person who owns this, this little penthouse here, but also the people who work in the building, because he also has access to security cam footage in which he basically kind of watches the staff do their day-to-day stuff like it's a soap opera. And there's no escape for him. Well, a little bit of an exaggeration, because there is an escape for him. There's a skylight that he could exit through, but it's way, way, way up on the ceiling, so he's gonna have to like slowly build his mountain to get up there over time. So for the most part, you're watching just Willem Dafoe struggle in this environment, like grow a beard. The other aspect too is like the plumbing isn't working all that well, so he's relying on a koi pond for water, and his waste basically just goes in a toilet and fills up over time. And it's just watching him being, trapped in an environment that's either too cold or too hot, or has no food, or just is inhospitable, or is just, driving him nuts from being like transformed into a hermit over time. So, a little bit of like shades of, kind of like the Lighthouse there, except it's more of like a one-man show. And for the most part, I feel like this film works in terms of like the themes it's trying to explore here. And it's mostly due to Dafoe's performance here, because like, let's face it, the one thing that needs to work in this film is Dafoe, and he doesn't kind of phone in his performance here. He does become this sort of this kind of like thief who grows disillusioned with the world and loses his mind over time. And that's kind of like par for the course for Willem Dafoe roles. And I feel like we spend a decent amount of time with the different aspects that this type of film would want to pursue, even if it does feel very scattershot at times. But it's beautifully shot. I love the way that they, have like the big open windows, like the way that the penthouse is set up, the way like the technology malfunctions, the various shots we have of like him like eating fish out of like the pond, and like the garbage left over, the waste he fills in the toilet, just building up this environment and watching this guy lose his mind. And on that basis alone, if that's all you're looking for, it's just Willem Dafoe losing his mind, you'll probably dig this film. And on that level, yeah, I actually kind of dug it as well. But if you're hoping there's some bigger thematic meaning here, it's a bit all over the place, where I don't feel that you'll get as much as you would kind of like for this film. Mostly just because it starts off with a pretty good monologue about, contemplating the lasting nature of art, and, basically how long Dafoe will last in this situation. It's an interesting parallel, and I feel like it's one of those films that the more I think about it, the more I'm kind of going to grow to like it over time. But at the moment, it's just kind of okay. It's just, it throws Willem Dafoe into this scenario, and it turns out some decent results for mostly just becoming a Willem Dafoe one-man show. So Inside is currently playing on Prime Video. All right. Well, we got through it. We got through another movie review stream. So let's do a quick recap of the films we reviewed on today's program. We reviewed The Exorcist Believer, a messy return to the Exorcist film franchise that is not off to a good start, with a film that can't quite decide what type of Exorcist film that it's trying to be. I reviewed Dumb Money, the film about the GameStop short squeeze. I don't feel it does a great job kind of dissecting the nitty-gritty of what went down with it, but in terms of framing it as an underdog story and trying to make sense of why so many people dumped their money into the stock, it does a good job showcasing that element and making it an underdog story about a bunch of people who have nothing left to lose fighting back against rich hedge fund managers. Good filmmaking, not as much divulging of the material here as I'd like. I reviewed The Creator, an original sci-fi film by Gareth Edwards, which looks astounding for an $80 million budget. It treads on some familiar sci-fi ground, but it's also a very well-made sci-fi film, even if it is using a lot of familiar elements from other sci-fi films. I reviewed 1001, the somber drama about a family trying to come together in New York, even though they're ultimately going to be split up in the end. It is fantastic filmmaking, it's edited well, and it is the directorial debut of A.V. Rockwell. Check this out. This is A.V. Rockwell is a name you're going to want to be keeping track of in the future. I hope we see more films from A.V. Rockwell. And I also reviewed Inside, starring Willem Dafoe being locked inside a penthouse when trying to steal art. Good performance from Dafoe. I like the way that it's staged, but its thematic elements are a bit messy, where it feels like a deeper message that could be spoken is just kind of like lost in the void of Dafoe going nuts. Which, to be fair, it is fun to watch Dafoe going nuts, so can't really fault the film on that angle. So, if you liked the stream and you'd like to see more early movie reviews, be sure to like and subscribe. I also have a Patreon where I release some stuff early through there, so be sure to check that out as well. So what do we got coming up in the next few weeks? Well, I'll see if I can turn about 2 weeks here, where we'll be covering some award season contenders, like The Holdovers, starring Paul Giamatti, as I believe a headmaster who stay behind with students on holiday. So probably I'm looking forward to it. It looks like a fairly good educational drama. I guess like it's a drama that takes place at school. I'll also be reviewing Killers of the Flower Moon, Martin Scorsese's new Western epic starring Leonardo DiCaprio and based on the book of the same title about the murders of the Osage tribe. So looking forward to cover that. And then, of course, we've got a whole bunch of other commercial films coming up, including Five Nights at Freddy's. And what else we got? Going in November, we got stuff like The Marvels and Wish, and it's just going to be chaotic. So I'm actually going to be getting... I'm actually going to be trying to get around to like a lot of the big awards contenders stuff. It feels like they're releasing the stuff earlier, like The Holdovers and Killers of the Flower Moon. They're releasing early in October, mostly because November's chaotic. You know, there's going to be awards contenders there as well, but it's also going to be tons of big Thanksgiving films. Like you have another Marvel movie, you have a Disney animated movie. You even have like smaller commercial stuff that I'm kind of looking forward to, like Eli Roth's Thanksgiving. And what is that? Ridley Scott's, it's not really a small one, Ridley Scott's Napoleon, which I'm greatly looking forward to, especially the 4-hour cut. Don't worry, the 4-hour cut's coming to Apple TV Plus. I believe the version that's going to be in theaters is only 2.5 hours long, so don't worry about that. So there's a lot to cover. So I might come back in like 2 to 3 weeks, but I'll definitely be covering The Holdovers and Killers of the Flower Moon, which 2 films I'm greatly looking forward to. So there's a lot of great stuff left coming in the year. So I'll see you all on the next stream. So until next time, have a good one, everybody.